All right. Hi there, Eleni. How are you doing?
Hi, Ali. Thanks for having me. I'm all right. Thank you. You?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm really excited to have you on the podcast, Thoughtful Minds.
Yeah,
So,
likewise.
yeah, I thought today is going to be quite an interesting talk. And one of the reasons is some of the work I do on social media and whatnot. A lot of people don't know much about life as a researcher abroad. And I thought we used to have a lot of interesting conversations, which is why I thought you'd be a good candidate for our interview today, for our podcast, sorry.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me.
All right, Eleni. So I know you really well, but can you introduce yourself to the audience and just tell them a bit about what you do?
Yeah, sure. I'm Eleni. I'm a pharmacist by background. I came to the UK in 2017 to start my master's. I'm from Greece originally. So I did the master in the University of Manchester, which ended up being in a PhD at some point, and a bit of a postdoc in Manchester as well in pharmacoepidemiology. And then I recently transitioned at the University of Oxford, and I now work as a data scientist for the UK Biobank.
All right. So lovely to hear from you. And for those listening, Eleni and I go quite a while back. So I know we met each other when we were both PhD students. And we've kind of just seen the transition throughout the years as we moved on to post PhD life and how we grew, not just as researchers, but as people. So the first thing that I thought would be really interesting to talk about is kind of things around being a researcher abroad. And what I wanted to ask you was, what has your experience been like adapting to the UK research environment as an international researcher?
So, well, there was a lot of fun because if it wasn't fun, I wouldn't really have chosen this career. But at the same time, I don't see it as a career. I see it more as a something that I really love and I enjoy doing it. But there were also, tough moments because the field is quite competitive. You have to perform. You have to do yourself to do your best all the time, and it is fun. But there are moments that it's very demanding, and I guess it's something common that every uh, early career researcher experiences, and obviously more senior people have different stressful lives, and securing grants and having people to work for them. And I think that it's stressful, it's fun. You cannot do it if it's not fun. If you do it for other reasons, it's not gonna be that fun. I would say. But everybody has his or her why of doing things. So yeah, that's my why. It's
Oh,
fun.
yeah. It's fun. I like that because there's a lot of a bit of negative sometimes rhetoric around, being a researcher or whatever, doing a PhD or a postdoc abroad. So this is a nice positive spin on doing the PhD. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on about is, for me personally, one of the things I found hard to adapt to is coming from the Middle East, kind of getting used to the UK culture, starting, a bit of a later age, having to find my way around. So, how did you find that moving from Greece to the UK and so on? Because I feel a lot of people ask about when they want to do a PhD or whatnot, they ask about the PhD itself and they often overlook the challenge of having to, move and start a new life elsewhere. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Mm, well, I would say that the transition wasn't. Well, first of all, in Greece, you cannot do research. Let's start from that, because funding for research is not that much, and you have to pay yourself from your own pocket to do a PhD or to do a postdoc, and it's ridiculous actually. Um, so the transition, because I came as a master student, I wouldn't say it was that tough in the beginning because I've already started during my masters to I had a really good advisor who was eventually my mentor for my MSc dissertation, and he was a very well established epidemiologist. Um, so we had the conversations and the discussions about what it feels to be a researcher, and what would be the challenge for me doing a PhD or transition into an industrial role. So I knew kind of for a very established senior academic in this in the University of Manchester what this would look like. I was exposed to his research group because I was working for a little bit before transitioning to a PhD. So he had a big project, and European funded project on antibiotics, and I had this exposure to PhDs, postdocs, more senior academics, so I knew somehow what's going on. And then I tried a few. I tried applying for a few PhDs until I secured my final one. I think it was the fourth one. So I just want to highlight to people that if you don't make it the first time, just try again. I'm not suggesting that you hit your head on the wall, but just try again. Um, so yeah, from the transition from the MSc to the PhD was kind of smooth, and I didn't find it difficult to do the PhD because it was exactly what I was imagining doing. Having my own research questions, start something from scratch completely, and it was great. It was tough, but I really enjoyed it. So in terms of the culture, uh, I was lucky having some Greek people in my circle, so I didn't feel isolated. And then I had friends in Manchester. I met you then. You were more senior than you are still more senior than me. So yeah, it was kind of you have to make sure that you are very focused and do what you have to do, but also don't exclude um, your social circle and yourself from other activities, because you have to carry on living your life and just add a PhD there, and not the other way around. You don't do a PhD and you shut down your whole life.
Definitely, definitely. There's actually two things that came to mind now that you just mentioned that. One of them,
Mm.
I'll actually tap into that, having a life outside the PhD. So that's something that I know I personally struggled with a lot, and I always tell people if I can go back in time, I have absolute no regrets about the PhD and how it went in terms of the PhD itself. But I do really wish I factored in a bit more time for things outside of my PhD, because what I realized is eventually, yes, I was working unhealthy, weekends and evenings and whatnot,
Oh
and maybe
yeah.
I did get there a bit quicker. But
Mm.
even everyone got there at the end. Even those who are a bit more chilled and laid back and enjoyed, they still got the same outcome. They got their PhD. So maybe I should have enjoyed my life a bit more. So
Yeah, I agree. And as you say, I got there in 3.5 years because I had to make it. And let's be realistic. I had an NIHR funded PhD, but the funding was for 3 years, and I ended up funding myself for 6 months, and that's one of the tough realities of funding in the UK, which I think we will touch at some point. But yeah, as you say, making it a bit more relaxed, if it's something that you can do, it gives you more opportunities to collaborate with other people and have much many more outputs than you could have on yourself, right?
yeah, I totally agree with that. And in terms of making it easier on yourself, like how can you do that? So one of the things I tell people, probably nobody takes on this advice. I say the first thing I would do if I was, is just get rid of Outlook on my mobile, like the email thing from my mobile. That helps a
Oh,
lot.
I did that very, very recently.
There you go. So just talking of practical tricks, because you're saying, like try to enjoy life. And I understand the pressure, particularly people coming from international. I'm not saying that domestic people have it less, but for a lot of people, the mentality is, I left home for this. This is my opportunity. I left everything for this. So this has to kind of be my life abroad. Does that make sense? So what kind of practical tips might you have for trying to switch off? Let's just say.
Well, now as a more mature postdoc, I block notifications in my phone. I don't even have applications in my phone. I'm kind of old school, so I have my phone as a phone,
I
that
like
I
that.
can receive phone calls and texts and nothing else. And when I'm at work, yes, I allow this chaotic stuff to happen, where people bombard me with instant messages or emails, or face-to-face communication and back-to-back meetings. But if I'm home or if I'm away, I absolutely, I don't do that. No.
It's good. That's good. It's brilliant. I was laughing when you were saying about that. I'm like, maybe you need one of those old school phones, with just a dial in. So one last thing before we move on to the transition is one of the things you mentioned about how the masters helped the transition. For
Mm.
me personally, I can attest to that because I did my master's first in Reading, and it kind of just helped me understand the landscape, how life is in the UK, and that's why I always say, similar to you, I felt my transition was a bit more easier because I had an understanding, even if it wasn't the same research team.
Yeah,
This is a
and
tough question.
I just want to add I just want to add something to that. Some people who coming from other European countries, they might find the demands quite different, because what I found myself is that the bachelor in Greece is more about learning as much as you can. It's about memorizing. It might be my bachelor, because it was in pharmacy and I had to be able to recognize chemical substances,
Everything.
make sure that I know the interactions from scratch, sorry, from memory. But here, what API wants to see is that you can say, I tried this and that. This didn't work. This worked a little bit. Do you have any suggestion? So it's more kind of a thinking process, and do things that are sensible, and not memorizing. And I'm a big fan of that as well.
It's very interesting you mentioned that. That actually got kind of a thought to my mind. It's exactly what you said. There is this thing around also expectations for people abroad. It was quite similar in the Middle East when I did my
Mm.
undergrad, and as you said, a lot of memorizing. And I won't speak on half of European people, but at least the region I'm from, there's a lot of this mentality where it kind of stems from the undergraduates, where I'm going there and the supervisor kind of holds the answers and the cards, and I need to kind of obey them. So then there's kind of this shock when you go to the PhD, because as you said, kind of in the UK, it's more of this, we discuss ideas, we try to bounce things about. There's no like 100% right answer. It's more about figuring it out as you go. And a lot of people struggle to kind of grasp that concept. Like even till this day, I get people like, who want me to be the supervisor, like, pick the project, whatever you want, doctor, I'll do. And I'm like, that's not kind of how it works in the UK.
No, not at all. And it's nice that more senior people, or master students now can challenge me, and I can say, I don't know, and I can learn from them as well, and that's fine. I mean, if there is something wrong in academia, that's a big egos, and I think that we need to overcome that as well.
That could be an entire 5 hour podcast if we want to talk about egos in academia. So we'll probably go on to the next topic. But the last thing that I thought might be good, and it's a tough question, you might not have the answer to. So, as we said, we had kind of the luxury of doing a master's, which kind of helped a bit. But from my understanding, is not everybody. Some people get a direct PhD offer. So, let's say to somebody, whatever, in Europe or India or Pakistan or the Middle East or Africa, gets a direct offer what would be your kind of advice to kind of ease that transition? You know, like they haven't somebody going directly from home to do a PhD. So what would be kind of advice would you give them for those starting their PhD?
Um, Maybe convince yourself that you're nobody and you're here to learn, and do the best in working around that bit, and also stay open and ask for help early on without assuming that you know everything, or you're supposed to know something. Just assume that you know nothing and start building from that. And people need to remember that it's not just about the qualification, it's a lot about building your researcher persona as well. And it's this is as important as it's building your research skills. I think these two words should overlap. And at the end of that, you should be able to know yourself better than before the PhD, you know?
And I totally agree with that. And I always think one of the key things about the PhD is obviously not just, you know, you actually get the PhD, it's the research persona, and also you learn about yourself as a person. I feel you grow a lot throughout that one. So we move on now to transitioning from PhD to postdoc, and I'm really excited
Oof.
to talk about this one because I really feel there's not a lot of stuff out there around making that transition. I think PhD's got a bit more, there's a bit more of a guidance and awareness of what to expect. Postdoc is kind of like this isolated, you know, this that not a lot knows about, and everybody just kind of
Nobody talks about
nobody
it.
talks about exactly. This is why I want to talk about. So, and I'm laughing because yeah, we had a lot of discussions, and I've kind of seen your lived experience to some extent. So, how was the transition from PhD to postdoc? Just talk us through about that.
I think that in my case, when I started a postdoc, I didn't really understand what I signed up for, if that makes sense. Because well, I was lucky enough to carry on doing a postdoc with the main supervisor of my PhD, uh, who's um, who's brilliant, and he's a very rich PI. So I knew that there was a security in terms of my job. I knew that I would have a job no matter what. um, but the thing is, what exactly you want to do and what the postdoc is, and what the how much flexibility the postdoc can offer. So the interesting thing for me was that until the end of the PhD, I was comfortable in a reality that I did whatever I want, and even if there was a subject for my PhD, I had the chance to start from scratch and do whatever I want to do in this research area. So I felt like, I had complete freedom. I wrote the papers that I want to write, I run the analysis that I want, I access the data set that I wanted. And then when you transition from that uh, full flexibility and freedom into doing something that is actually somebody else's idea and has to be delivered in a certain way, because there are also 15 other collaborators, um, at the end of the day it's a job that you have to deliver an output. And maybe, just maybe, you're not that excited anymore in exploring this research question, unless it's very highly relevant to what you've done in the past and what you want to do in the future. So I think that people have to be aware about how interesting what they sign up for doing it is.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the things is a lot of people go into a postdoc is, as you said, there's kind of one, the comfort. I was guilty of that as well. I'm finishing my PhD. My supervisor has a postdoc secured For me, it kind of sounded like a safe move. I already know I've worked with this person. And then there's other people who it's just kind of a bit of a panic decision just to get some kind of a job. You know what I mean? So
Can I interrupt you?
yeah.
Because I finished my PhD in March 2023, and I started the postdoc 15 days after that, thinking uh, completely irrationally that I can manage it. And I found myself somehow burned out in in the middle of it. And I realized looking back that people had to really switch off, and if it's possible, take a couple of months completely off after that, because you're used to the crazy reality of the PhD that is doing something all the time, and then you feel that you can carry on forever. And now your body and mind will decide when to stop at some point.
I really like that advice because I'm actually give the same advice. So I think we're quite similar. I remember I even, because I was on an international visa, so I actually even worked for free on the postdoc unofficially until the advert came out because I was in this mentality that the show goes on, you know? And as you said, right now I give people the advice is, if you finish your PhD, take some time off, go, don't just straight away jump into that unless it's absolutely necessary. So the thing that you mentioned some of the challenges. So what was the most thing you found surprising about the transition from PhD to postdoc? So what was the thing that completely kind of caught you off guard, or the most thing, as I said, that you thought, I was not expecting this going into a postdoc?
It was shocking for me to understand. It took me a few months to understand that it's so hard to do your own stuff during your postdoc, and even if that's writing up a fellowship or a small travel grant, it feels as if there's no time for that. And I was frustrated, and people didn't talk about it unless you. So I found myself quite confused, lost. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to escape something that I thought I was excited about, and I ended up feeling stressed, overwhelmed, and frustrated.
I would say, I think that I can attest to all of that. And what I usually say is the postdoc is an interesting phase to be because although the PhD comes with its difficulties and challenges, but the end goal is in sight. It's quite clear. I always say that it's a bit of a zero sum game. Like
You will get there at some
you'll get
point.
there. You either get the PhD or at some point get very frustrated and you don't want to continue. That's pretty
Mhm.
much the two outcomes. Whereas the problem with the postdoc is that the end goal is not really clear because it's not a degree. You're not going to be handed the postdoc, So
Yeah.
so there is this kind of in limbo phase. And I always say it kind of sucks in a way because you're no longer a student. And unfortunately, sometimes in academia, like you get the feel you're not even staff. You're in this middle where you're not a student, but you're not a full time. So how do people manage that? Does that make sense? And how do people make sure they don't just fall into this limbo phase, as you say, where they're just frustrated and they don't know where it's going?
Well, I was lucky enough because I had good sounding boards, and I had good mentors that were again very very successful people. They were professors, and they were happy to discuss this stuff with me. And also, I want to mention something else. Doing research in the UK might look like uh, different than in other countries. So you can do just research, you can do research and teaching, and you can do just teaching. Um, so because I've I've selected this road of doing purely research and being supervised by people who were lecturers, and then they transitioned to PIs at some point. I felt that there wasn't the kind of understanding of what being a postdoc feels like and how much pressure you can put on the postdocs. And I think it's such a valuable experience to know. what actually means doing 100% research from the beginning of your career. Um, so yeah, I found my folks, let's say. They were happy to share their challenges, and whatever I described wasn't something unfamiliar to them. So yeah, I was supported. I had the support that I needed, but I had to find it myself. I had to go and knock the door myself, and I think that going first is something that people don't really dare to do. And if you think about it, what is the possible outcome? A yes or no? So it's 50-50, and that's fine. You have to make yourself bulletproof, and don't take rejection as the end of the world.
That's true. And I really like what you said, that whole having to kind of look for it. Because as you said, it's not like as soon as you come a postdoc, a mentor is going to automatically find you, or the support system is going to find you. So you're going to have to.
Yeah. Or also, the mentor who might be able to find you might not be the mentor that you can communicate with, or he can help you the way you want to be helped.
Exactly, exactly. So what would your and as you said, I like that you mentioned the path. I kind of jumped the boat, and I am aware some people abroad might not even understand, like the term postdoc, what it means. So obviously, for the
Mm.
audience, postdoc is someone who's doing a research only, and it's a fixed term job. So it's tied to the project itself, and as soon as the project finishes, you have to look for a new job. This is just explaining it to the audience. How how do you, as a researcher, like how do you manage that? Because I remember one of the most stressful things is knowing you're not on a permanent job, and as soon as the project finishes, it's on to the next one. So how did you manage that stress, shall I say, or yeah.
Yeah, in the past it was much more stressful, because I understand that people might be in certain contracts, as you say. Then your PI might have a contract for 1 year, and they can secure another year or another 6 months, and you finding yourself in rolling contracts that where you don't really know, shall I write the fellowship, shall I find another job, shall I carry on doing my things and just stay focused and switch off my mind. I think you have to do everything together, and also make a wise decision about that contract thing, because when you see a year contract of on a project that I'm super excited to work with these people and for this project, you said, oh, that's heaven, I'm gonna go for it. But after 5 months on that, you will have to find another job, and securing additional funding yourself is not guaranteed. You might end up finding yourself, working in another project that is not that big fun anymore. So choosing your postdoc a bit wisely might be the way to go. At the moment, I'm working for the UK Biobank, which gives me the flexibility to, you know, um, I know that I will have a job tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and the year after this, and so on, which gives me enough enough peace of mind to try other things. And if they don't work, it's gonna be fine, because I have a job. And also, I'm considering other opportunities as well that might be outside of academia. It might be the industry, it might be teaching roles. I talk to people, and I also write and try different stuff at the same time. So the only thing that changes is the anxiety that I had being in the shorter contracts. So taking this out of the equation right now drives my focus and energy in the right direction. Yeah, it's not less stressful. I mean, it is much less stressful, but it's not that I'm experiencing stress from every possible direction, if that makes sense.
No, no, I understand that. And as you said, I think at some point I think being a postdoc, there is an element of some point you have to trust the process, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. I know when I first started, there was a lot of, because my first contract was 1 year, and there was a lot of, I put my whole life on hold. Every time someone was like, this is, I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen after. And then at some point, I would say in full confidence, although like I didn't land, I was like, no, it's fine. This is how it works. I'll find another one and another one. And you just kind of trust the process and you just go with it.
Yeah, I
So,
remember that one. One if in our one of our recent conversations, we had the similar chat, and you asked me how this contract situation works, and I said that now that I have a really long term contract, I don't even know if I want to stay in academia anymore. Well, before previously, I was thinking, oh, what's going to happen? I have to apply for this funding and this funding, and it takes uh, it takes a lot of energy to think about this rolling contract situation. But this is how things work, and even if I don't like it, I think it's the right it's the right way because possibly we're much more in as a number, which much more than the system can sustain, and everybody won't have a chance to do his own research, and that should be fine because at the end of the day we cannot relate our whole self to our CV, and that's fine. We're much more beyond our CVs, and
yeah,
we should be able to have that confidence that we can find and do successfully any kind of job or career outside of that world, and
yeah.
that should be fine.
I love that. I love that. I really love that. Actually, that's one of the things that I think I'm glad it's becoming a bit more spoken about. So there is this notion now that it's okay if after your PhD you decide you don't want to do a postdoc, or you do a postdoc and you decide I want to go to industry or whatever. I want to be an entrepreneur or a freelance or whatever. That conversation is becoming a bit more accepted, whereas before it was kind of like, oh, you're a failure, like if you went through all that. And I think also there is this kind of fallacy of sunken costs, where I've committed this much for a lot of people, and I'm not going to mention names. I know there are people who don't really enjoy it, but it's just kind of like I did the PhD and I did 1 or 2 years of post, and I have to just keep going because otherwise, what's the point? So I like that phrasing, and I always tell people it's not linear. Maybe you can even get that role you want, or get that postdoc flexibility, or even become a lecturer and say, hey, I had a good run. I want to do something else. You know?
Exactly. And I think that's why I mentioned that trying new things is always a key because sometimes you don't even realize what sort of skill sets you have developed. And maybe, I enjoy doing research, but if I do teaching, I might find myself that I enjoy doing teaching and I enjoy interacting and helping students, which is very, very fulfilling, and you really believe and you really feel that you can contribute to someone else's journey because our I think part of our role is throwing ladders to other people and helping them.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the more rewarding aspects of the job is that whole helping people and mentoring them. And you mentioned a bit about the postdoc and how to kind of try to find the right one. This is a bit of a tough question,
Yeah.
but how can people kind of identify the right postdoc, or as much as possible? There's no such thing as the right postdoc, because what some people have told me is, I try to put things out there around, trying to get find a good postdoc, but they're like, how do we know? We just see an advertisement, a job, and a few years. How do we know if that team is toxic, if the culture is good, if it's bad? How do we know if this person has the best interest of me? Because all you see, is on whatever, find a job, or it's an advertise. And maybe I tell them, have a conversation with them on video call, but it's one conversation at the end of the day, and it's hard to really. So what can kind of be the telling signs? Not necessarily. Maybe earlier on the postdoc. I know it's very hard prior to the postdoc. You have to kind of just give it a go, and but what are kind of the telling signs maybe earlier on for someone that this postdoc is not for me, or maybe this group is not someone I can get along to? Because the amount of like shocking, toxic postdoc stories I hear online, is a lot. So, what would be kind of the telling signs of not necessarily that it's toxic, but it's not for you, let's just say, or this is not a team who will probably align with my goals and I need to go elsewhere. So, what kind of would be your tips or indicators or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, that's a tough one, and I would say that you risk it. As you say, yes, you can spot a few stuff, and they during the interview, or you also have a chance to ask questions to people and see find out. But you have to be a little bit of a, psychology trained kind of postdoc, which you become eventually after a while on that. um, the other thing is that you have to accept that there will be some level of BS in that job, because as I say, it's expected that people with high qualifications running very very big projects and secure all this kind of money, they have their egos, and it's sort of expected to 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 have some sort of BS there. But you also have to make sure that you define clearly what's your tolerance to that. Uh, there might be issues that you will tolerate and you don't really care about, because I don't think that it's sustainable that if you don't like the behavior, you search for another job. You have somehow to learn and adapt yourself in how to deal with these behaviors, and understand that the behavior is not about you, and it's about the other person often. And unless you've done something right. um yeah, I think you have to manage your emotions really really well, and I think
Mhm.
that's an important skill to develop, not just as a researcher but as an individual. Yeah, if you are reactive instead of responsive, then you have to look at yourself and find out what's wrong with you. And I think that I'm sort of grateful for the difficult people that I met in my life, especially in academia, because they taught me the hard lessons. Yeah, I had to improve myself a lot, and um, we don't need to be always right. We don't need to expect fairness all the time, but we don't also need to feel that we are betrayed or victims, or it's part of the process. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. I think I'm laughing because whenever people tell me what was the hardest part of doing a postdoc, I say pretty much the politics and trying to handle it,
Yeah,
not the actual research.
politics, unfairness, emotions, the behaviors is a big part, because you know that people in high positions, or at least in higher positions than us, uh, are almost encouraged to behave in antisocial ways without ever have the feeling that they could be rebuked by the organization. It's, when there is no clear regulations about punishments, and when you cannot remove someone from his position because he's acting antisocially, you have to deal with it.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And as you said, I think part of that stems from a bit of the power dynamics are not in your favor as a postdoc
Yeah.
because you're this early career researcher who's starting on their journey on a fixed term contract, whereas you're more likely working under a very established PI who, as you said, will probably can get away with doing what they want. They bring a lot of money for the university and so on. And I guess, as you said, there is an element of just trying to remind yourself, not to take it personal. I think it just kind of comes with time. The more you kind of go through
Yeah.
these.
Yes. What I want to say is that I'm more. Um, I've developed a thick skin in terms of that because this stuff happened to me. It's not that, and I expect that other stuff that I don't know yet will happen to me, and I'll be much more, bulletproof. But you have to experience that, yeah.
Yeah, experience the best teacher, unfortunately, for this one. Um, One of the things I tell people, and I wanted your thoughts on it, is it's, and I've actually had a discussion with somebody around this. I always tell people expectation setting because in PhD, the expectation is very clear. You want to get your PhD, you want to get
Mhm.
your publications, and they, as a supervisor, they want to supervise you to completion, and obviously it helps them. They supervise. The expectation is quite clear. When you move on to a postdoc, and I always say, you said, as you mentioned earlier, the dynamic is different because now you're working under somebody's project. It's their project, and obviously their expectation is they want to produce this project, get the output,
Delivered, yeah.
deliver. That's the word I'm looking for to the funders. Whereas for you, obviously, that's part of what you're doing, but you also want to build your research career. And I always tell people have the conversation earlier on. Don't expect that the PI is going to magically understand what you want to get out of it. Maybe you want to do a fellowship, maybe you want protected time, maybe you want teaching experience. I don't know. Maybe you want. So I tell people to have that conversation. And what are your thoughts on that? Because somebody even told me, he's like, but it's not easy to have that conversation. I mean, what if this conversation ends up in my.
I'm a big fan of having the difficult conversation. And I actually I'll go for it because it's a way to, hone your words and make sure that you can stand up for yourself. It doesn't matter that you are not that senior yet or you will never be whatever. You have to make sure that you are your biggest ally. So if you cannot talk about your rights, because it's not the right thing to have a postdoc working for a professor's career. It has to be a learning experience, even if there isn't a qualification at the end of the road.
Exactly.
So it's a balance about helping people and get help from them. And I'm not suggesting that you are the postdoc where you go there and you run and you write your papers and you work on different projects, and because I've seen that as well. uh, but you give something and you make sure that you take something, even if the way to take it requires from you to put extra amount of work, or you know for example, starting at 7 or 8 a.m. and saying that the first thing I'm going to do is every day to write an hour, to dedicate an hour to write the stuff that I'm interested in. And then I start working for the postdoc itself, which gives me other skills as well,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really like that. And I found that worked well for me. So I had that discussion earlier on, and I said, as you said, it's kind of like it's a negotiation or I'm finding the balance. You can't be all purely selfish and say me, 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 because at the end of the day, you're paid to deliver to help.
Yeah. You cannot go to a new a postdoc position and say, they give you, I don't know, 2 years contract, and you say, oh, I want to write a fellowship. Who's gonna take you
Exactly.
seriously? But you can write that fellowship along the way, acting under the radar,
Yeah.
by dedicating some time seriously on writing this fellowship. But don't expect that the postdoc is 9 to 5 work. You will find yourself working on the weekends sometimes, and that should be fine. That's why it should be fun, first of all.
Yeah, I agree. And as I said, so that was something that I remember worked really well. I said, I'm going to work on it in my own free time. And all I ask for you is once every 2 weeks is just to kind of have a catch up because they were also going to be involved in my fellowship. And I made it very clear I'm going to work on your work. It's going to have the priority, but in my own time, I'm working on that. That's where I'm heading to, in the future. And that kind of made things very clear. There wasn't the shock factor. I was transparent. So as you said, it's having these skills. So moving on a bit to kind of the research culture. So one of the questions a lot of people will ask is, as you said, you talk now about having to work weekends sometimes and whatnot. So how do you balance it all? Working on research, publishing paper, trying to develop your own research ideas, trying to have your own life outside of research. Yeah, how do you kind of,
Uh,
yeah, how do you make it happen?
yeah, well, I don't work during the weekends for the actual postdoc. If I do that, I will be doing it for my own research projects and my own ideas, and it's gonna be something that I really enjoy doing it, because if I do something in the weekend that has to be delivered because I didn't manage to deliver it last week, I will be frustrated. Yeah. So I'm making sure that the hours that I'm at the office working on the actual postdoc, I'm productive and I'm focused and I'm keeping the momentum. But I've also dedicated time for building my own stuff. And again, it's another momentum, and it's an everyday process. And I found also uh, a writing buddy, which is Marwa, and we're really getting along well with this. It's like having a gym buddy. If you don't
Oh, yeah.
feel like it, there will be someone else
Accountable to hold.
dragging you in,
Yeah.
yeah, reminding you why you here. So yeah, I think that making sure that you have structure helps, and also make sure that you can allow unstructured and unstructured moments and unpredictability is also part of the process. And if you have to work more on a weekend or in the evening, I think that's fine, just do it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's something around having to put your own structure because I think the challenge with our kind of job as a researcher is it's not like a typical 9 to 5. As you said, it's kind of like milestones and things that need to be done. So if you don't impose these structures, you could easily end up letting it eat up all your time and just working nonstop, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So probably now I'll talk just a bit about,
and
no,
al- and also making sure that you have time for switching off, and
100%.
whatever that means for you. For me, it's not going back home and staying there for 3 weeks and work from home. For example, if I want to go back, I want to go back for a week, see my relatives and family, and come back. Or if I'm out with my friends, I want to be there. So make sure that you're present, and you don't allow this unstructuredness intervening um with your time off.
I really love that. Yeah. And that's something I learned, I think, over the last few years, more recently, I would say, in my career, where, as you said, time off is time off. Before it was like it was time off, but I'll check a few emails maybe in the morning. I'm visiting back home. Oh, I'll justify it. Maybe my parents are not awake yet. Might as well do this. It's only a tiny thing, but now I'm like, it's a solid no.
Yeah.
This
And
time off is
I'll never forget what my previous PI told me at some point. And I was really tired, and he told me, "You have annual leave, and I've said to you that you have to use it." And it made so much sense, because now I don't really block my calendar, 3 months ahead. I just know that I have annual leave, and if I need a long weekend off, I just take it. Whenever I need, whenever I feel that I have the need to switch off.
exactly, yeah. And I think that has made a huge difference as well for me because you really feel like you switched off. So when you come back, there is that bit of I actually switched off. You know, it wasn't kind of like, no, I was answering emails here and there. So
Mm. Yeah.
I'm always
And
an advocate for that. Yeah.
and also, sometimes you block your calendar 3 months later for a week, and you realize that you are in your researcher mode, and you can do your best work, and you say, "Oh, well, I don't really like to go on vacation right now. I'm over functioning. I'm so productive." And yeah, I think making sure, making very clear, make sure that you're clear about how you can recharge is is very personal, and you have to know what's the answer to that.
Yeah, yeah. I like that. And as I said, I know everyone is different. Some people maybe for life circumstances, they have to plan ahead. For example, people with families and
Yeah,
whatnot.
yeah,
I'm
correct.
more along the line with you. For me, it's more like when my body's giving me the signal, I know it's like when I'm getting cranky, annoyed. As soon as I wake up, I'm like, not this again. It's time for an annual leave. That's it. You know, that's the signal. I'll contact my land manager, be like,
Yeah,
okay, from next week or tomorrow onwards, update. That's kind of
yeah,
my
yeah,
signal when the days get
yeah.
heavy, you know?
But my signal is that when I start saying to myself, what am I doing here?
It's time to go. It's time to go. Uh, that's a good one. I think it's good we're having this conversation around switching off. So, one of the things that I wanted to touch on this podcast is the importance of networking
Mm,
and working relationships. So, I've always had a somewhat controversial statement, and I've always said this loud and clear. The best researcher doesn't win. It's not about being, you could be the best, most gifted and technically, but if you don't network or if you're kind of stuck in your lab or in your work zone and nobody knows about you, that's my personal belief. Some people could challenge me on it. You can only go so far. Like networking plays a very important role. I
I
believe
totally
that.
agree.
Yeah. So how important is it for networking to advance your academic career? And maybe you could share some examples. I mean, where it made a difference for you.
I think it's as important as the research you're doing. I think it's equal, and not because you have to be known by the big names or by the more senior academics, but to make sure that you want to make sure that you will have the support that you need. You have to go and knock this door and say, "Look, I'm Eleni. I'm doing that." And get to know this person, because before you touched on how you know that your new postdoc is going to be the right one for you. So we're talking here about building something from scratch, and if you want to have your own lab or your individual project, you have to make sure that the people you work with share your values, and they are kind of easygoing people that you can work well with. You don't want to end up with a mentor who's difficult for your next 3 years of your fellowship. So to avoid that, you have to go and talk to people and make sure that you can give clear introductions about what's your research, what's your background, how you can contribute to what they're doing, and what are the overlapping areas of your research. Because you don't want to be the postdoc who's well known by everyone and has no value to add, and you're someone who's you're not a politician. You know what I mean. You have to be someone who's targeted, and for example, if there is a talk, and you know who's gonna be in that talk and what this subject is about, if it's relevant, go and talk to this person. If it's not, just stay quiet.
I think that's very sound advice because I can talk from personal experience, as you said. I like the thing that you said about you have to knock on doors. I think that's probably one of the most important advice to make these connections happen. And I know personally speaking from experience, until this day, there's this element of, whether in person or through an email or whatever, trying to make yourself known. And not there's a lot of misses, not all of them are hits, but when you do
Yeah.
get these few hits,
And there's also timing, as in personal relationships, right? You put a seed, and it grows after a while. or never, but that's fine.
Exactly. And I think one of the important things is having that mindset shift. So I remember when I was chatting to my mentor and she told me, I think sometimes as researchers we're guilty of, if it's not data collection, analysis, or writing a paper, it's a waste of time. We kind of have that mentality. I'm not,
Mm.
and she told me no, like whenever you try to go to an event which you think might bring you value or having that, she's like that's actually part of your work to build that network. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And Ali, some people will end up being your mentors, some will be collaborators, some might be your friends. You
Exactly.
know, your support network is not just uh, a purely work related network, because it's a relationship. Working relationships are relationships. And you don't want to be transactional.
Of course, of course. And I like that the way that you phrase that exactly. So like there can always be a good outcome out of it, and not all of them is going to end up being a collaboration on a £1 million grant. It might be that you just meet a really nice person. And you're like, this, it was really nice talking to this person. You know,
Yeah.
they do something completely different to me. We're never going to work on research, but it's a nice person. It's good to know him. You know, I think that's very important. So what advice would you give to, an early career researcher who's trying to build these supportive networks? You know what I mean? Earlier on, like what can they do, to try to have a good support network around them? One of them we mentioned obviously is reaching out, knocking on doors. But is there anything else that comes to
I
mind?
think that you have to work on yourself and make sure that it's clear for you what you're looking for, um, what's important to you in a relationship, what a good working relationship means, what a good mentor means, where do you want to see yourself in the next 5 years or 10 years, how do you want to develop as a person, working closely with the mentor, or working with people um, at a certain lab. Some people have different skills to serve with you. They might be good at communication, which is really important. They might be good at securing funding. They might be just good in maintaining a network, and
I
some of
agree.
them are good in doing the actual job. Yeah.
That's true. I agree. Knowing what people's skill sets are.
And I think that you need a little bit of everything if you want to go up the ladder. I don't like this expression,
Sorry.
and I don't really actually
To
aiming
progress in life,
for it.
let's just say, instead of
Yeah, just yeah, see yourself somehow.
yeah.
So if I think that I want to become, you know, a more senior academic, further down the line, what skills do I think that I need, and what conversations I have to have, and what who's gonna be around me that can be supportive in that um, journey. I think people need to think a little bit that way, which is not. It might sound a bit calculated, but I would call it strategic. So being strategic is always useful.
No, I agree with you. I like that being strategic is very useful. And as you said, you don't have to have one mentor. It could be multiple mentors for many different things.
Absolutely, and people who don't know that they are your mentors are your mentors.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be a formal, as you said. It could be someone
Yeah,
who just gives you very valuable tips. And as you
yeah,
said, one of the things I realized is people have different skill sets. Some people in the higher position, they may be not the most technical researchers, but they're really good at managing things. They're really good at leading teams. And then there are others who are very technical. So it's trying to kind of take bits from everyone.
yeah. I think it's so hard to have it all to find it all in one person. That's why I guess that we have multidisciplinary teams and big teams.
Exactly.
Mm.
So probably talking a bit now, just a bit on building resilience or staying focused. I think this is an interesting one. So we're all aware research could be tough and very unpredictable. So how do you stay motivated during setbacks? I mean, the times where it's really not going well. You know, when you're as a researcher,
Yeah.
frustration, papers are getting rejected, grants are not
Mhm.
coming in, your part team is just for whatever reason just not bothering
And
you.
the best is when you have it all this together.
Yeah, and sometimes it just all happens in one like thing. And so how do you deal with these kind of situations, when things are just not going? And I think even as a researcher, sometimes it's not even a bad week or month. It could even just be a bad research year where not much has
Yeah.
progressed. So how do you kind of cope with that in the long term?
Well, good question. I don't know. I'm still working on that too. I haven't figured it out, but I think that, as I said before, having things outside of work helps a lot. Making sure that your life is not your job helps a lot. uh, Expecting the fall downs, the periods that things won't go well, it's fine. And also having the experience that, oh, when this didn't go well in the past, what did I do? I did XYZ. So you can self-help yourself somehow. And also, having in your routine things that they're working for you individually, but you have to find out what's that for you. So for me, it helps. Journaling every day helps a lot. Meditating day and night also helps a lot. Going to the gym, make sure that I eat well. All this stuff that we think they're the boring stuff. Just make sure that you have time to do that, no matter what. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, because that's one of the things that I've once again have kind of that mindset I adopted more recently. Is before I realized when I made research my life, these
Mm.
setbacks will have a huge emotional and personal toll on me. Whereas more recently, when I've, as you said, given more attention to my hobbies, whether it's, gym, running, spending time with my family, friends, doing other things on the side, whether it's content, whatever. So when research is not going so well, you kind of have these other things to bounce back on and be like, hey, it's not the end of the world. This is not
Yeah.
going. I've got these other
And I
things.
think that because we've been through this stuff, the ups and downs, and there were some periods in my life that, oh, I wanted to have an adrenaline hit because it feels good, even if it was a new job or a new successful application or a new paper or a new collaboration. It gives you that
The
hit.
dopamine.
That's true. But actually, what most of life, what life is most of the time is that you're somewhere in between the ups and the lows, and you have to make sure that you enjoy that stability. And actually, what I intend to do is to stay in that stability. So I'm not taking anymore that adrenaline hit that I had in the past from something that went well, and I don't go that down if something won't go well, and I'm just chill, and I accept that it's part of the process.
Yeah, I'm just smiling when he said that, because I literally had the exact same thought. I was chatting to someone and I was telling them the exact same thing. Was our number before, as you said, there is that nice rush when you're publishing and papers are coming out, and you get invited for whatever I talk, and it's like life is going good. And then there's kind of like this huge down when it goes away. So now, as you said, now I remember telling my friend, like, I actually enjoy these nice days where nothing much is going on. I have my cup of coffee, I go for a walk, I do my work, and I go home. And as you said, I realized with that mindset, it's a bit more emotional stability in that. And even when things are going well, I don't get too excited about it. I'm like, okay, cool, it's going well. And so it kind of, you're no longer just having these huge ups and downs. It becomes more just kind of like a stable, and maybe a bit of a peak when things are going well, maybe a bit of a down when things are going, but it's more, and I think that's a much
Exactly.
healthier way, because you're not
Yeah.
like letting your emotions dictate, or the
It
adrenaline.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're kind of getting addicted to the emotions, I think. Even if it's the low
Yeah.
and as well as the extreme well. think that is like take it easy, it's fine.
Exactly. And one more thing before we move on to practical tips, because for the interest of time, I mean, you might not have the answer to this, but could you maybe, for a bit of inspiration, I mean, share a story about a failure in academia, or not a failure, maybe a temporary setback, and how you bounced back? I mean, I've told my famous story of, the three rejections, and then I applied again. Like, what is there maybe a time where you felt, this was something that, maybe people can take inspiration from, a setback that you bounced back from?
I don't know what to pick.
There's
I'm
many in
afraid.
academia.
Um, Maybe a quite tough one, financially and personally, and procedure, as a process, was close to the end of my PhD because a lot of stuff were happening, and I had pressure from every possible direction. As I said before, I ran out of funding, so I had to fund the last 6 months of my PhD to finish. Uh, I got papers rejected. My future job was up in the air. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I had to secure a job or apply for for extra funding, and also personal situations that were tough. I had to relocate at the end of the PhD. You know that.
Yeah.
um, and I didn't have the appropriate support from my personal network at that point. And it was a time that my stress was at an alarming level, that I was isolated because I wanted to get through that and finish that last 6 months of the doctorate. And also I realized that the people that I had around me at that point were unable to support me and give me what I need. And I was starting feeling so much pressure because I was seeing clearly that what I that I was what I was building and working so hard for the last couple of years was there, but with me kind of collapsing inside, and I didn't have the tools, I think, to make sure that I could support the life that I was building. So I think it was a transition, a real transition, and then the turning point that I realized that sometimes what you want what you need in order to build something new is the the previous stuff to completely collapse and disappear, and you build something new, but by the new self you hold. Yeah, but I asked for help, and I want to tell to people that are listening to that universities also provide counseling and talking therapy. So if at any point you need help, make sure that there are people who can help you.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's very, very well said. So we'll move on to the final portion of the podcast, which is just practical tips usually. So this is practical wisdom for the modern world. So we usually like to just give people, from the guests, like if they can give them some practical tips. So for looking back now, like what's something you wish you knew when you were starting your career as a researcher, or what would you say to your, the Eleni 17 years ago who's starting her early, starting her research career?
um, in terms of doing a PhD, you mean?
In general, just starting on the path,
Huh.
yeah, as a researcher or.
Well, yeah, I think that what I said before about respond and don't react is something. It's an important one. um you have to make sure that you know yourself and what triggers you. because there will always be behavior that will piss you off, but you want to make sure that you understand that, and where this is starting from the other person, and when it's hitting you so badly because there's something that you don't know about yourself or that you ignore and you don't want to work with it. So yeah, make sure that if you have some people who are so provoking to you, make sure that you keep them in your life, and it's a nice lesson, you find out a lot about yourself, I think. Yeah, managing emotions, I would say, it's not that I would, looking back, I wouldn't do something um different. You just have to go through that process. Maybe I wouldn't work that much. Maybe I would be able to recognize earlier on when it's time to take a break. Um, and maybe I wouldn't have stayed so long in situations that were unhealthy. I think that I would enjoy burn a bridge earlier on when I realized that it's not working.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, and that's actually the ending part is important because I think sometimes in researchers we kind of sometimes feel even if the situation is unhealthy or not favoring us, like we have to kind of it's like we build this up in our head. It's a duty or an obligation to kind
Make
of
it work, right?
to make it work.
Put the effort, because that's what you've learned is very certain. Put the effort and you'll get the output, but it's not always that way.
Exactly, exactly. And just a final thing, you touched on it, but just to kind of make it stick. So, for someone who's, as you said, looking to start their career or even in the middle of it, and we don't have the answer to this, but what would be your advice on balancing all the pressure, to publish, to network, to have a personal life without burning out or trying your best not to burn out? What would be your advice to balance it all without burnout? Because as you know, burnout is a very big thing in I think even in
Make
the
sure that you know why you do that and what are your expectations from this. If you do it for your as an ego injection, to tell to yourself, oh, I have papers in Nature and Lancet and B&J, does it matter?
It's true. That's true. I think that dopamine boost can only get you so far, of papers and egos and titles that you have to actually know why you're doing it. Um, all right, so we'll probably now sign off. Thank you very much. I think I really enjoyed this talk. It reminded me of
Thank you. Yeah,
the
likewise.
the discussions we used to have back in the day. Just a final thing, where can people find out more about you and your work for those who are listening and are interested to learn more about what you do?
I think they can find me on social media like LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm not that active. I'm not as active as I would like to be. I'm not a big fan of social media. I prefer face-to-face communication, but yeah, people can find me there, or they can drop me an email, and yeah, I'm always happy to talk.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Eleni.
Thank you.